Thank you. It's maybe no coincidence that there was another very important event that happened in Paris a few weeks ago. And speaking, of course, of the terrorist attacks that provoked a response that was somewhat similar to the discourse around climate change, that something has to be done right away. Immediate action is necessary. And of course, we're seeing what the immediate action is. Security, bombs, war, hate, attack, counterattack. In other words, maybe your political views are different than mine, but I think that the immediate, quick response is something that is going to intensify the conditions that gave birth to the terrorist attacks to begin with. So this is to be expected when we respond to something in a way that doesn't understand the deep causes. You end up simply going through formulaic reactionary responses that don't address the real problem and in fact make it worse. I feel therefore a little bit wary about the whole discourse, the whole conversation about urgency. We have to act right now, because what if our actions, in some way that we're unconscious of, what if our actions exacerbate the deep situation that is giving rise to climate change? I mean, what is the cause of climate change? Certainly, carbon dioxide is a proximate cause of climate change. But what is causing us to produce so much carbon dioxide? And you dig level after level after level. You get to the economic system, you get to global finance and debt, you get to the deep mythology of our civilization, our relationship to nature. And I believe that if we do not change at this level, then the results are going to be disappointing. The results, in fact, have already been disappointing. Many of the things that we have tried with the idea that they are going to reduce CO2 have brought contrary results. I was just speaking to somebody a couple hours ago who 10 years ago was very enthusiastic about fracking, because according to the data that he had seen up till then, it looked like fracking was going to be much cleaner than coal and oil, and it was a positive step toward mitigating climate change. The same arguments we have seen for nuclear power, for GMOs, genetic, we're going to create biofuel crops, modify them, and reduce CO2 that way. Biofuels in and of themselves, huge forests are being cut down and made into wood chips as we speak right now to feed coal-fired plants. And yeah, like, you could say that the arithmetic is faulty, that if you really do the calculations right, you will find that clear-cutting vast forests and replanting them with monocrop tree cultures isn't actually going to reduce CO2, but it's still used as a justification. Big hydro, the math looked good, but now we start to understand that rotting vegetation in the flooded areas produces methane, and that doesn't work either. And so we think, okay, perhaps we've just not been clever enough and done our math thoroughly in reducing this quantity called CO2, or greenhouse gas equivalents. And what we have to do is to be more thorough in our measurements. But I think that this whole mindset is itself part of the problem. When we focus on the measurable, we ignore the things that we cannot measure or choose not to measure because we think it's not important. So things like, I don't know, human sex trafficking, child check, or preserving indigenous cultures, or even stopping a gold mine that's not going to have a big CO2 impact. or maybe something very small in your own personal life, these things become relatively unimportant compared to climate change. But what if we don't really understand climate change? I was recently with a Native American guy, Larry Littlebird. And like many Indigenous people I've talked to, actually I'm not sure his exact views, but many Indigenous people I talk to think that carbon is maybe not even the most important factor that's causing the Earth's climate to spin out of control. Near where Larry lives, there's a mountain that's considered very sacred to his people. And there's a plan to put a gold mine on that mountain that would draw millions, hundreds of millions of gallons of water from deep underground aquifers. And this is a semi-desert area. The water takes millions of years to accumulate, and it would suck all that water out, but it's not going to produce a lot of CO2. But he says, when you steal the gold from the mountains, you're stealing their soul, and very bad things will happen to Earth if we do that. Another woman I talked to works with Indigenous people in Brazil, and they said, mining the copper and the metals out of the tropics and transferring them to the temperate zones, that's what's causing climate change, more than CO2. You guys don't understand. Another Native person I talked to said it's when we insult the water that don't allow the rivers to reach the ocean anymore, then the ocean doesn't know what the land needs. And of course the climate becomes deranged. And we could say, well, this is completely unscientific. We know how it works. But that arrogance, I think, is becoming obsolete. When we are urgently hurrying toward a solution, we tend to ignore the things that we don't know. See, I only have 15 minutes to share with you, and here I'm taking a little pause, even though I should be in a hurry to say more faster. One of the earlier speakers talked about an initiation. I look at it as a coming-of-age ordeal, a rite of passage. When what we thought we knew and who we thought we were falls apart, and we enter a space of I don't know. I have a prediction. I think that we will be successful in reducing fossil fuel use beyond even the most optimistic projections. The world will come together in this. And the climate will continue to become more and more unstable. Global warming, global cooling, some here, some there, extreme fluctuations that get worse and worse. And the reason is that we are, even if we stop using fossil fuels, we are doing so many other things that degrade the planet's capacity to maintain homeostasis. We don't know the deep function of mangrove swamps and the migration paths of elephants in Africa. There are those in Africa who say that the migration paths have some kind of energetic effect on the land, on the continent, and on the planet. And that's why the elephants will choose a particular path, even if they have to break down a fence, even when there's a gate that was made for them 100 meters over there. They know exactly where they need to go. There are systems on this planet that we have no understanding of. Really what climate change, what this crisis is calling us toward, are two fundamental realizations. Despite the flaws in the current narrative that focuses on a metric, on a measurable quantity, where do we get practice in basing policy on a measurable quantity and seeking to maximize or minimize that measurable quantity. Well, that's exactly the logic of economic growth, where you gear policy toward maximizing GDP growth. Transferring the same mentality onto CO2 isn't a very deep kind of revolution, and it ignores the things, as I said before, that we're not measuring, the invisible things that seem less important when you have this trump card of climate change, which in the end generates contrary results, as we have seen many times. Anyway, there are still two things that I believe are the true initiation, the true rite of passage that we are going through now as a civilization. One is that we are finally understanding that what we do to the planet, we do to ourselves, and there is no escaping it. This is our first glimmering of that understanding. Soon, I hope, we will learn that it's not only that we cannot escape greenhouse gases, and we can't engineer our way out of that. Although there are some even who haven't gotten that message and think that geoengineering could perhaps mitigate climate change. I mean, what could go wrong? Let's fill the atmosphere with sulfate aerosols. That sounds like a good idea to me, right? Anyway, but that's lesson number one. That what we do to the planet, we are doing to ourselves. And as I said, we're going to learn that what we do to any piece of the planet, any mountain, any river, any lake, any ecosystem, any species, whether or not we can measure its climate impact, its CO2 impact, it will still come back to harm and impoverish ourselves inescapably, because we are interlinked and interexistent, interdependent, interconnected with everything on this globe. That's the first lesson of our initiation that we're going through. And the second is simply that we're all in this together. We began learning that lesson with the advent of nuclear weapons, when for the first time, a total effort to exterminate your enemy was impossible. Total war became impossible. And because we're so accustomed to thinking in terms of finding an enemy and defeating that enemy by force, we really don't know what to do with that realization. And we're still in the habit of finding an enemy and trying to defeat them by force. And when we find such an enemy that's weaker than ourselves, we're almost happy about it. Finally, we can let loose and destroy something, and it'll solve the problem. But the rise of nuclear weapons, and now especially climate change, is bringing us to the realization that we are all one human family and we all are in this together. So, and yeah, this is what, I'll just say one more thing. This is what a rite of passage is. In a traditional context, a rite of passage made your identity fall apart, made you doubt who you were, what's real, what's possible, how life is supposed to be. And then from that breakdown, you would step into a larger identity that transcended the small self and included the whole tribe. Humanity is going through precisely that. Transcending the small self of humanity as something separate from nature, something destined to transcend nature, to be its master, to manipulate it, to see the globe, to see nature as a collection of resources for our benefit. So far, the climate change narrative hasn't quite gotten to that point. It still sounds to me an awful lot like, let's just be a little bit more clever in manipulating these resources. Because if we don't, then something bad will happen to us. That's not a deep enough revolution either. The revolution that we need has to come from love and not self-interest and not fear. We're not going to, suppose I hear my friend Joe here, suppose Joe says, you've been treating me like shit and exploiting me for your personal benefit. And I'm like, oh, well, you're right. Why should I stop? Why? I'm, exploiting him and I'm benefiting from that. Why should I stop? And he says, well, if you don't, then really bad things are going to happen to you. Everyone else is going to find out about it, and your self-interest will be harmed, and maybe your children won't have a safe place to live. Okay, well, that might scare me into change. But what about like, I should treat you better because you're a beautiful, sacred human being, and you are worthy of respect in and of yourself? What if I open up to loving my friend, to seeing him as a subject just like me? Now, you see where I'm going with this. That only love for this planet and for everything on it, whether or not we can calculate its. And I'm not saying that the metrics and calculations are useless. They do give us deeper understanding. But where we really have to come from is a place of beauty and grief. From to appreciate the beauty of what we have, its preciousness, its sacredness, and its aliveness, and to change that lens that we have inherited ever since the scientific revolution. That lens that sees it as a bunch of building blocks, a bunch of stuff to dominate and control and manipulate. That is the change of perception that is underneath. I mean, really, everyone is here because you are in love with this planet. I think we need to bring that into the dialogue. I'll just end with one little story. I had a conversation with a guy in North Carolina recently, really negative guy. He was just so angry at the government, at everything. And he was going off about chemtrails and conspiracy theories and so on and so forth. A complicated topic I won't get into, but and he said, we just gotta rise up and destroy those people, destroy those evildoers, destroy Monsanto and everyone in control of Monsanto. We've got to act. Can't just talk. I've heard that a lot here, actually. We've got to act. We can't just talk. Yet everything that people say is acting is actually talking. Even drawing a sun around the Arc de Triomphe, right? Or all of that is symbolic. Even if you go and you pound stakes into trees and pour sugar into the gas tanks of bulldozers to harm them, the power of that is still in its perception, in the perception that society has. It's only successful if it gets into the media, if it becomes a message, sending a message. And that's normal because we live in a matrix of stories. And we have to change the story. Anyway, I asked this man, and so basically, we do not have as much force. If action means force, if it means overcoming an enemy by force, we do not have enough force to overcome the power elite with their guns, their surveillance, their media concentration, their money system. We don't have enough force. But I asked this man, I said, well, what turned you into an environmentalist? And then he just opened up, this like tough guy, and it turned out it was because the lakes that he grew up on were all developed, and everything beautiful in his life was lost. And it filled him with such pain. And I said, yeah, so there it is, beauty and grief. And how do we touch that in the people at Monsanto, who, as a matter of fact, are actually very nice people, and if you want to make them into villains, have a conversation with one of them and notice what story is this person living in that makes everything they do seem right and good to them and makes you seem like a hysterical, raving idiot who just doesn't get it. Like, what story are they living in? So again, it comes to changing the story. And I guess my message is that story change has to go all the way down to our basic perception of nature and everything in it. Thank you, Charles. Thank you.
Yeah.